Well, it is officially July, which means E3 season has come and gone. Or, well, it's not really E3 anymore, I guess. It's just kind of gamer Christmas now. Is that the name we're going with? I don't know. But this year overall was pretty good, I'd say. Sony's showcase was just kind of okay, but Spider-Man looks amazing. Summer Games Fest was definitely a step up with new Prince of Persia, Alan Wake 2, and our first full look at Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Xbox ended up being the best showing out of all of them, in my opinion. Finally showing projects like Fable that's been in development for years at this point, giving us a release window for Hellblade 2, and of course that super in-depth look at Starfield, which looks amazing. And Nintendo, well, they hadn't shown up until I started writing this video, and then they dropped a direct, but screw it, that they didn't drop during the week of E3, so we're not counting it. But despite the decent performance put on by everyone involved, the company that I personally kind of think won E3 wasn't any of them. Surprisingly, I think it may have been Sega. And I'll tell you why just here in a few seconds. I'm Jax, this is Grand Starvit, let's get into it. Now, why do I think Sega ultimately won? Well, there's a few reasons. All 5 titles they showed off are from series with a fairly proven track record in terms of quality, and we'll go over all the games here in a minute. And not only do all 5 of those games that they showed off have release dates or a release window of some sort, they're all releasing within the next year and a half, which is something that a lot of game devs have had problems with over the last few years, when they'll announce something like Metroid Prime 4 just as it's starting development, and then have something screw up horribly towards the end, and then have to restart the whole thing, and now suddenly it's been like 6 years. None of that, yeah, this game is in development, maybe we'll talk about it again in a few years, I don't know, BS. That's not here, thankfully. And with all of Sega's announcements, there was kind of something for everyone. We had turn-based RPGs with Persona and Like a Dragon / Yakuza, a genre that has been sort of on an upswing over the last few years and has just slowly gotten more popular again. We had a platformer with Sonic the Hedgehog, which is obviously probably the most wide appeal out of everything here, and it's something that almost anyone could get into. Then finally, an action-adventure beat-em-up sort of style with a new Yakuza / Like a Dragon game once again. It's almost like a shotgun blast of game genres. So sure, it's not every genre in the gaming space by any means, it's far from it in fact, but what they do cover is a lot of the essential or more popular game genres in the industry at the moment. So now that we've gone over all that, let's jump into the games they announced. So we'll start with Like a Dragon Gaiden, The Man Who Erased His Name, and Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. Admittedly, all I really know about these games is that they're Yakuza games. So Like a Dragon is apparently what they've been called in Japan since the series' beginnings, and they're finally doing that across the world now to help unify the brand, I suppose. But from what I could tell and from the gameplay they showed off, The Man Who Erased His Name seems to be sort of a return to form for the series after Yakuza Like a Dragon changed things up by tackling the turn-based JRPG genre, while Infinite Wealth will be a continuation of the latter. They both seem pretty cool, and the games have only become more popular over the years as the series has expanded and older games have become bundled and gone on sale and whatnot, so I'm sure there are a lot of fans looking forward to these. The Yakuza / Like a Dragon games have always been one of those series that I've been interested in playing, but I've just never really got around to it. The entire series is on Game Pass though, so if you're interested and have the service, probably wouldn't hurt to give it a shot. Next was an announcement that was a bit out of left field, and that's Sonic Superstars. We've known for a while now that Sonic Team has been working on another 2D Sonic, especially after the success of Sonic Mania, but interestingly enough, this isn't from the same team of fans that Sega hired for Mania like had been rumored for a while. It's by a completely different company, but thankfully that doesn't seem to be a detractor by any means, as the game looks really good, especially for Sega's first attempt at a 3D side-scrolling Sonic game in the style of the original games in a while. That, didn't go over too well last time. I'm admittedly not much of a Sonic fan. I think he has fine games. They just aren't really my cup of tea, but this one does have me interested. The art style is very charming. It's a nice combination of classic Sonic with a bit of 3D to give it this nice new coat of paint feel. Almost like how New Super Mario Bros. Was a breath of fresh air for 2D Mario before it got absolutely run into the ground, and now I hate looking at it. That's a video for another time though. Another plus to this game is just how faithful it seems to be to the original Sega Genesis games. There was a comparison video on Twitter where the physics were like almost 1-to-1, and everyone who played the game at Summer Games Fest seemed to love it. The developers are clearly trying to recreate the magic that Sonic has very slowly been getting back to over the years, and honestly I have a lot of respect for that. Fans seem super excited, it's got me interested, which is a big plus for any Sonic game. So Sonic Superstars is shaping up to be a good time once it releases later this year. So the next 3 announcements were my personal favorites, and that's because they all stem from one company that Sega owns that's kind of been hurled into the spotlight over the last few years, and that's Atlas. Starting was probably probably the most low-key announcement out of the three, Persona 5 Tactica. Now, 2 of the 3 games Atlus announced were basically entirely leaked before they were properly announced at the Xbox showcase, and this unfortunately was one of them. There had been some rumblings about this game being a Persona 5 fighting game, similar to maybe Persona 4 Arena, but I do think it's neat that Atlus is trying something a little different with the Persona brand. If you couldn't tell from the title, it is a tactical game similar to something like XCOM or Mario plus Rabbids, or even Fire Emblem to some extent, starring the Persona 5 cast, where they've been sucked into some sort of steampunk-esque world where they gotta fight alongside some revolutionaries. It's got a new art style, kind of reminiscent of the Persona Q series, and overall it does look like a fun time if you're into tactical games or just want some more of the Persona 5 cast. Persona 5 is just one of my favorite games of all time, so I personally fall more into the latter group. Tactical games tend to be a little hit or miss for me, but I'll definitely be giving this game a shot since it does look like it'll be putting its own spin on the genre like most Atlus spin-offs do. And hey, it's gonna be on Game Pass, so if you have an Xbox or PC and want to give the game a shot before buying the full version, you can. Next is Persona 3 Reload, and this unfortunately is also leaked before the Xbox showcase in a similar manner to Persona 5 Tactica, but this was also leaked a few months ago with a proof of concept video that was supposedly showed at a Sega meeting or something? I don't know, man. Sega's always screwing these things up somehow. But Persona 3 Reload is a full-on from the ground up remake of the original Persona 3, and it looks awesome. They've updated literally everything to be more in line with Persona 5, so we're getting stuff like new character portraits and an entirely new UI, new voice actors across the board. It's fantastic. Out of the entire mainline Persona series, aside from 1 and 2, I think Atlus may have just forgotten that those games existed. I don't know. 3 needed a remake the most. It had several frustrating and out-of-date mechanics. It really needed some love and care. But one of the major reasons it needed a remake was because of how many versions of the game there were and how it never really had a definitive edition to help tie together all of that new content that had just slowly been spread out amongst those re-releases. For some reason, they aren't really doing that here. It's a little weird, but it's just how Atlus operates, I guess. But the game does look fantastic, and I am super excited to finally give Persona 3 a shot. Pun not intended. Finally, and I think the most surprising out of every announcement here, for me at least, was Metaphor Refantasio, or Refantasio? I don't know, I'm gonna say Fantasio, that sounds cooler. This game has been in development for literal years at this point, known as Project Refantasy, and a lot of people had started to wonder if it had been silently canceled or was just stuck in some sort of development hell, but no, here it is at an Xbox showcase of all things, and I think it looks absolutely fantastic. To whittle it down to the most simple explanation possible, it just looks like a Persona game if it were set in a fantasy world, and that's basically what it is because that's what the team that did Persona 5 has been working on since that game released. It looks absolutely gorgeous. I cannot wait to see what they do with it and see what's different from all the other Atlus games over the last few years, and just like those Atlus games, it's just oozing with charm, and I honestly don't have much else to say other than it looks awesome, and I can't believe we're finally getting it next year. So that's every game that Sega/Atlus showed this year, and to revisit my first point of every series having some sort of proven track record of quality, pretty much every recent Like a Dragon/Yakuza game has, to my knowledge, received nothing but praise. I hear nothing but good things about those games, even the older ones. Sonic is even on a bit of an upswing with both of his live-action movies doing really well, Frontiers being pretty well received and selling really well, and while not as recent, Sonic Mania was clearly a wake-up call for Sega and what fans want. And Persona's popularity has only skyrocketed over the last few years. Persona 5 continues to be absolutely massive, and even 3 and 4 have been getting a ton of love recently because of their ports to other platforms. And finally, to kind of just wrap this all up with a nice Sega and Atlus covered bow, every other company just kind of stumbled in their own unique way to make me not want to favor them as much. Sony, like I said, was a fine presentation, but it had a lot of live service games, like the Square Enix Splatoon ripoff with Bubbles. Who asked for this? Their weird handheld that I would like to do a video on, I think? I don't know. And really their only solid game out of their entire showing was Spider-Man. Even then, its release date was relegated to a Summer Games Fest announcement for some reason. A lot of confusion from Sony. Xbox, like usual, had a pretty good showing, but it's hard to give them any sort of trust with how shaky their output has been over the last few years. Halo Infinite has failed to really capture any sort of mainstream appeal. Redfall was a complete and total disaster, and honestly the only 2 releases that I can really think of from them that were really outstanding were Hi-Fi Rush, which was a shadow drop in the middle of January, and Flight Simulator. You're not doing good if one of your best releases is Flight Simulator. Summer Games Fest? It's Summer Games Fest, I don't know what you expected. And then Nintendo, I'll be honest, if the Direct was closer to not E3 week, I would have included them, but also we hand them way too many W's. We've got to give them a couple L's every once in a while just to knock them down a few pegs. And I say that as the guy who absolutely loves the company. Now, despite giving the gold medal to Sega and Atlas, I do think we're in for a very good year of games just in general. Like I said, Xbox does need to prove themselves, but if they manage to follow suit with their promises, they're going to have releases next year, which is nice. Sony has Spider-Man 2, which is going to be great, and then even if those live service games are just okay, those are still releases, so they count. And then Nintendo had their Direct, they have a bunch of releases this year and even next year now. It's going to be great. But in my opinion, Sega and Atlas pretty easily stand over all of them at the moment. How did you feel about not E3? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like. I'll have another video out here in a week or two, so if you want to see that, feel free to subscribe. And until then, I will see you in a bit.